Well, if Jesus is separating the world between the rich and poor, the full and the hungry, the weeping and the laughing, blessings to the former and woes to the latter, I'm afraid I'm mostly on the losing side of that equation. Jesus had gone up to a mountain to pray. And after coming down, a huge crowd followed him. They had come to see him and hear him, and they brought their loved ones who were in need of healing. They brought those who were possessed by demons. The crowd was pressing in on him, trying to touch his garments to gain access to his power. They came to Jesus because they could not find what they needed on their own. And Jesus called them blessed. Perhaps not because of their specific condition or need, but because they knew how dependent they were. I wonder if it's even possible for us to enter that space this morning. I wonder if it's even possible for us to recognize that in spite of our relative wealth, in spite of the mostly good life we have carved out for ourselves, that we need more than we are able to provide on our own. I wonder if we can admit that each of us yearns for that divine love and acceptance that only God can satisfy. I wonder if we are willing to admit that our possessions and our lifestyles and the impression we try to give to everyone around us that we have our lives all together are ways that we insulate ourselves from our deepest needs. To be blessed is to know that good things come from God. To be blessed is to throw ourselves on God's mercy. To be blessed is to know God's love, to experience God's peace, to receive God's grace. To be blessed is to be immersed in the life of God. Woe, on the other hand, is what happens when we cut ourselves off from the good things of God, when we live in the loneliness of self-sufficiency, when we measure our lives by the worth of our lives by the number of our possessions, when we believe that taking care of ourselves is the meaning of life. The woes are aimed at those who refuse to welcome the stranger, who refuse to acknowledge the suffering of others, who live as if money is life's primary currency, who live by fear and hatred. All Saints Sunday reminds us that there is a long parade of people who have known God's blessings, some of them living and some of them who have died. All Saints Sunday reminds us that when we have God's blessing, we begin to see both life and death differently. It was a little less than 6 months ago that we celebrated All Ash Wednesday. Do you remember the refrain of Ash Wednesday? Dust you are, and to dust you shall return. It's true. None of us are exempt. No one gets out of this place alive. No one is exempt from death. No one can avoid the death of those they love. Seeing death differently, however, from the vantage point of those who have been blessed allows us to recognize and give thanks for those who are important to us, those who have, as the scriptures say, returned to dust. Those who are also, however, caught up in the promise of God who first created humanity from dust and continues to raise the dead to life in Christ. One of the things that I love about this day is that it invites us to an honest vulnerability about this deeply profound part of what it means to be human. We are born, we live, and we die. That cycle of life and death takes on profound meaning when we know the God who has created us and when we acknowledge how dependent we are on God and on one another. At the heart of human life is this mortality, this deep vulnerability. Vulnerability, I should warn you, is a nice-sounding word that names a condition that most of us would like to avoid. Vulnerability names the condition of our dependence. It's often not comfortable, and our culture regularly invites us to imagine that we can and should avoid vulnerability. But while vulnerability is uncomfortable, it's also what makes us human. Brené Brown is a sociologist and author from whom I have learned much about my own vulnerability and about how to be more authentic in my relationships and in my work. She reminds us that when we try to numb those things that are uncomfortable or pose a risk, feelings of sadness or grief or vulnerability, we also numb our ability to experience joy and satisfaction and happiness. It's all part of life, and it's all part of what it means to be fully human. In this community of saints, in this congregation, when we are at our best, we can be a place that reminds us that vulnerability is not something to shun or deny. God has promised to meet us precisely at the points of our own vulnerability. He has promised to be there in those places of our greatest need, those places where our hearts are broken, when life is hard and when we suffer. This is why the Nicene Creed, after testifying to Jesus' divinity and humanity, goes on to assert that for us and for our salvation, he came down from heaven. And this is why Jesus, in Luke's gospel, comes down off of a mountain to warn those who believe that they are something apart from God, and to bless those who the world and the circumstances have conspired to make feel like they are nothing. Blessed are you, dear saints of God.